We interrupt this record to bring you a special bulletin. The reports of a flying saucer hovering over the city have been confirmed.
Did you really go out with an alien? Uh-huh. What was it like? Real different.
Becoming Human, a Mork and Mindy podcast. Hello listeners, this is Paula Schaffner with episode 34, Mork versus the Necrotons. This first aired on November 18th, 1979. It was an hour-long episode, so it would be split up into two parts for syndication. Therefore, there are two IMDb synopses. The first is, 3 voluptuous aliens from Necroton capture Mork and attempt to find out what information he's learned about Earth. Part 2 is Captain Nirvana kidnaps Mindy in order to coax Mork out of hiding. This was the 25th Mork and Mindy episode directed by Howard Storm, and it was the first written by the writing team of Alan Eisenstock and Larry Mintz. They'd worked together on the Gary Marshall-produced Angie sitcom as well as some other series. We start with a sunny exterior at the deli, and there's snow on the ground. There are tables that have red, white, and blue cloths and bunting, so sort of a patriotic look. There's a buffet laid out, and there's maybe a dozen extras. Nelson is in his usual suit with his own campaign button. Remo is in his red and white straw hat and red and white striped blazer, so that sort of circus barker look, and he's also wearing his blue deli t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers. Jeannie and Mindy are both in jackets, blouses, and skirts. Jeannie is in heels, and Mindy is in boots. Everybody looks happy, Remo especially, and we'll soon find out why. Jeannie says, what a turnout. She's really impressed. So even though this doesn't look like a crowd to me, I guess it's more than they're used to having in the deli, and that's part of why Remo is happy. Mindy confides in her that she's really shocked at this turnout. Nelson puts his arm around Remo's shoulder and says that the people came because his advisor, meaning Remo, delivered Nelson's message to the people. Remo says the message was Nelson was paying for lunch, so that's why Remo is happy, because he's making such a profit on the food. And then Remo laughs and shakes Nelson's hand. Jeannie hands Nelson the bill, and Nelson says he'll pay it next week. They should trust him. They have his word as a politician. And of course, Remo is cynical about politics, and he tells the people, drop those forks, the kitchen's closed. He tells a gray-haired lady, take that wiener out of your mouth, and he actually pulls it out of her mouth. And this is the first of what will be many, many innuendos in this episode. Mork enters and says he's sorry he's late. He was out polling the neighborhood. He's out of breath because it was a Gallup poll. So a little pun there. Mindy tells Nelson that Mork is all his, meaning that's enough dealing with Mork for the moment. Nelson asks if Mork got a good cross-section. Mork says he didn't want to discourage Nelson, so he just polled Nelson's friends. Nelson is amused and says it must have been pretty one-sided, and Mork says, yeah, it doesn't look good. We have no idea who Nelson's friends are outside of Mindy and her friends. Mindy says Nelson should probably start his speech. Nelson asks Mork to introduce him to the general electorate. Mork says, is he here? I love what he does with refrigerators, punning on the company General Electric as if it's a man, General Electric. Nelson chuckles and says he gets it.
Ladies and gentlemen, please, can you put down the stuff? We have a moment here for your attention. Thank you. I'd like to introduce a man that flattened me in my dreams, and a man who will flatten your dreams too. Let's bring him up here. Nelson Flavor, the albino wonder. Come on, bring him up here. Come on now. Here we go. No pictures, please. It hurts his little pink eyes. Come on.
So we've got Mork again joking about Nelson being an albino. I guess because he's so blonde and the cast is basically brunette. Nelson thanks him and says good morning to all you over 18ers, people who are old enough to vote. And then Mork's mouth starts ringing. And this is definitely one of the moments watching this episode now where you remember we are in another time. People did not suddenly start ringing. There were no cell phones. So this seems very strange. Mindy is annoyed and Nelson is understandably distracted. Mork tells Mindy that he thinks Orson is trying to call him. I don't know why it rings, but maybe that's what happens if Mork doesn't pick up right away. Nelson comes over and asks why Mork is ringing. Mork says it's because his knocker is broken. Nelson says that since Mork is the sergeant at arms, he should throw himself out. Mork says it will be his pleasure. So he pulls himself out of the room by his jacket and tells Mindy to call his lawyer, and he exits to the restroom. We hear Orson calling Mork and saying, "Come in, Mork," so a reversal of roles there. Mork calls him sir and asks what's up. He points out that Orson never used the day rates before, so a reference to what the telephone rates would be during daylight hours. Orson says they've got big trouble. Mork says right here in Boulder City, which is a Music Man reference. Orson says it's deadly serious. A spaceship from the planet Necroton landed on Earth. Mork says, "Oh no, not the Necrotons, our arch enemies." Orson sarcastically says, "No, they're a hockey team." Of course they're our arch enemies. Mork says that that's a good retort, and that's 1 for Orson and 8 million for him, so he's impressed by Orson's sarcasm. Orson says it's no time to be cute. They were after Mork. Mork asks why him, and Orson says it's because Mork is there. They want to know what Mork knows about Earth to see if it's worth conquering. Mork says he doesn't know anything about him. Now, if you recall, there were 2 or 3 references to the Necrotons in season 1, but maybe what he means is he doesn't have any direct knowledge of them. He asks what they look like. Orson doesn't know. No one has ever seen them and lived. For all Orson knows, they could look like anything from a human to a wedge of Velveeta. So apparently Orson knows about Velveeta. Mork says, "Thanks a lot, sir. That narrows it down to everything." Even though Orson said that this is deadly serious, he now says, fortunately, it's a limited threat. The Necrotons can only survive Earth's atmosphere for 24 hours. All Mork has to do is what any patriotic Orcan would do in a time of war. Mork sort of squares his shoulders and says, "Hide." And Orson says, "Exactly." This ties back to season 1, where we had lines about how Orcans try to avoid war and hide. Orson tells him to remember that not only is Mork's life in danger, but the lives of every Earthling. Mork says, "Too bad you're not here, your tubby tood. We could all hide behind you." Even in a time of crisis, he's still going to make fat jokes. He says "Nanu Nanu," and then to himself he says, "Necrotons, haha, I'm not afraid of them," but we'll soon see that he is. Back in the deli, Nelson says, "So in conclusion," so he's been speaking for a while, we don't know how much time has passed, and people are still eating. "So in conclusion, I want you to remember my campaign theme. A vote for Nelson Flavor is a vote for me." And everyone claps. Because I guess if you go to a Nelson Flavor rally, you're not really expected to be inspired. And these people are obviously just here for the free food. A small table with napkins and plasticware on top starts moving. Mindy pushes it down and finds Mork underneath. He tells her he was working on his impression of a turtle. So this is another episode, like the one where he was imitating Nelson's lava lamp, where he has to have impressions like he's a stand-up comedian. So I don't know if that's lamp shading Robin Williams. Anyway, she pulls him out and to his feet. She asks him what's the matter. She says he's been weird before, but never this weird, which is definitely not true. He quickly explains, and he says the Necrotons could even be disguised as food. So when Jeannie offers him a snack, he shrieks and knocks the tray to the floor. He says it was self-defense. Mindy puts one arm on his back and one hand on his arm and says that Mork isn't feeling too well. Jeannie says neither is her antipasto. Mork says he'll send her a card, as in antipasto. And I just want to say right now that watching this episode today, although it's been a few years, I kept thinking, my God, this is one of my formative experiences, and I know I have stolen that joke at least a couple times in my life. Mork is still worried about the Necrotons being disguised as anything, and as the gray-haired lady goes by, he says that she might be the mothership. And then this scene ends there, and it felt like that maybe that was just an edit during production, probably a few lines after that, and they just figured, let's just end it here. Felt a little bit abrupt to me. Felt like there should be some follow-up. There's a sunny exterior of the house, and again, there's snow on the ground. Mindy comes home in the same outfit, and she calls for Mork. In fact, she'll be wearing that outfit for the entire rest of the episode. I'm sure she would have chosen differently for comfort if she'd known. She throws her coat on a chair and sits on the couch, and then both Mork and Mindy scream. She jumps to her feet, and he emerges from under one of the cushions. He says it's all right for him to sit on his face, but he doesn't think that she can. Another suggestive line. One that's probably inevitable with this show. She tells him to get out of there, so he steps out onto the floor. She puts the cushion back, and she wants to know what's going on.
Right, but I gotta make it real quick. Now, what would you do in this situation?
She has him sit next to her, and she says that if she were him, she would slow down and speak more clearly so that she could understand. He says he's just a little panicked, and here's the straight poop. Necrotons are the scourge of the universe. Orcans have emotions, but Necrotons have only 3. Hate, lust, and greed. She says, no love, and he says, no way. Ever since he can remember, Orca's been at war with them. She says that she thought all Orcans were pacifists. He says they are. That's why every time they go to war, they go into hiding. Claude Rains would have been one of their national heroes. So an Invisible Man joke. He says all they have to do is hide long enough and then the Necrotons will get tired and go away. They want his reports to Orson. They want to find out if Earth is worth destroying. There's kind of a confusion in this episode on whether the Necrotons want to conquer Earth or destroy it, or both. Mindy wants to know why they want to destroy it, and he says, well, I guess it keeps them busy. And I thought that was a bit of a lampshady line, that how much character motivation do you need to give to villains? He says he's got to find some place to hide. He goes over to the armoire, but he says no, he can't hide in there. He's been out of the closet for a year now. So that was a cute little callback to early season 1 and how he used to sleep in the armoire, which I still can't pronounce, sorry. He takes out a long, filmy floral dress and his silver suitcase. We haven't seen the suitcase in a while. He's going to go incognito. He thinks what better way to hide than in her dress, because hiding is a drag. I know we've had a drag pun at some point before. He puts the suitcase and the dress on the dining room table. He asks her where the tapes of Ethel Merman singing Led Zeppelin are. This, of course, is a contrast between Ethel Merman's very showbiz, Broadway kind of singing and Led Zeppelin. Although Ethel Merman did do a disco album around that time, so it's actually not as far-fetched as you might think. Mindy asks where Mork is going to go, and it'll be someplace no one ever goes. The frozen tundra, the barren desert, a Mike Curb rally. And I have to say, as a Californian, this was one of the biggest laughs of the episode for me. Mike Curb at that time was 34, and he had been elected lieutenant governor in January of 1979. He had an interesting past in the sense that he was a music producer and also movie producer, including a lot of biker movies like Devil's Angels and The Born Losers and so on. He became a born-again Christian. In 1978, he produced the music for the movie The Magic of Lassie. He was a Republican and he was encouraged to enter politics by Ronald Reagan and would campaign for him. And he was still active in politics in the 80s, and I vaguely remember a political commercial against him that brought up his movie producing of the 60s. I don't really remember him as a person, so I don't know if he was as colorful as you might think. He's still alive. Obviously, Robin Williams would not have been a Mike Curb fan, and so I thought that was a funny line to throw in there. And of course, it connects with Nelson having a rally that is rather sparsely attended, and people are impressed that it's even that many people. Mindy wants to know if there's anything she can do to help. Mork says she doesn't need to worry because Necrotons can't breathe the Earth's atmosphere for more than 24 hours. He'll be back tomorrow, unless they find him. Mindy wonders what they'll do if they catch him. Mork says that people who've dealt with Necrotons have a saying, and then he screams as if he's being tortured. She tells him to wait and briefly grabs his arm. She says there are over 70,000 people in Boulder, so they'd never find him if he just stayed here. He calls her good old logical Mindy and says, you old palooka, and lightly punches her on the chin. He says the odds of them finding him here in this particular room in the next 24 hours are, and he does a little computing, and it's 362 million to 1. So among other things, this episode is educational. You learn about math, you learn about history, you learn about geography, astronomy. No wonder it had such an impact on my 11-year-old brain. But of course, the door blasts open and Mork says it must be his lucky day. And of course, it's unlucky.
Einstein was right, men. Space is curved.
I am Captain Nirvana of the Necroton Black Army. Kama, Sutra, fall in. Orkan, you have exactly 5 seconds to get your meaningless life together in one bucket.
Men, those are Necrotons. They're as mean as they're ugly. No, stay away. Stay back.
I'm going to get all the information you have out of your little pea brain. It's up to you, Bright Eyes. It can come out of your mouth, or I'll suck it out your ear.
I mean business, Min. Hope this room is scotch-guarded.
Mork, do something.
Oh, I am, Min. I'm shaking as fast as I can.
You can't just barge in here and suck out his brain.
Orcon, curb your pet.
Pet.
Min, heel, girl. Heel. Don't worry about that, Min. I'll guard us with a force field. See that, Min? She's frozen in her tracks. She won't thaw for months. Is it spring already?
Your silly little Orcon weapons are useless against us.
Run for it.
Silence the pet.
I'll pet you, you bimbo.
Trapped.
Oh, it's not that bad. We'll have our house broken in a month or so. Come on, let her go, please.
Private, the trance-inducer.
The pink one.
Or the yellow. Oh, just give me one, you twit. All right, you cute little hot potato, you are going to be under my power.
I'm afraid you've underestimated the incredible hulking will of an orcan. I scoff at your sparkling balls. Bachelor number one, if we were to go to Tijuana.
All right, take him to the spacecraft. Oh, don't worry about your master. He's going to be just fine in a little torture chamber. Must be the runt of the litter.
So we get to see what the credits aptly describe as special guest star Raquel Welch, and she was a 60s sex symbol who was still a standard of female attractiveness into the 70s, as anybody who watches The Brady Bunch can tell you. And at that time she was 39. She's still alive at the age of 82. And I won't go into her full career, just that she was a legend. Her suggestively named privates are Kama and Sutra. The blonde is Kama, and she was played by 24-year-old Deborah Jo Forden, who was Playboy's Playmate of the Month in September 77, and she would go on to have a few roles after this. Sutra was played by 30-year-old Vicky Frederick, who was Helga on a Happy Days Laverne and Shirley crossover two-parter that kicked off the 79-80 season. And she would have later roles as well, going on into 92. Getting back to Raquel Welch, she just embraces this role, throws everything into it, and of course she looks gorgeous. I assume the audience knew she was going to show up, but they applaud, as you would. We get Mork saying, "Einstein is right, space is curved," another suggestive line, and also another science lesson for you kids at home. The way Ms. Welch pronounces Orcan as Orcon is fun. We get the introduction of sucking information out of someone's ear, which will continue on through the rest of the episode. And I like that we can see that both Mork and Mindy are scared, but they do try to stand up to Nirvana. Mindy is indignant at being called Mork's pet. Although we don't know when this episode is set, apparently spring is months away. And I thought it was interesting that the Orcan force field doesn't work, but the Necroton one does, suggesting that their powers are stronger than Orcan. We have Mindy calling Nirvana a bimbo, which is very Laverne and Shirley of her. We also have Nirvana arguing with Kama and Sutra, which is done for laughs, but it also tells us something about the relationship of these three characters, which will impact the plot. So I thought that was nicely introduced. Nirvana finds Mork cute even in this first scene. We get another Incredible Hulk reference. Sparkling balls is again another suggestive line. And there's a dating game reference. We first hear about the Necroton spacecraft and torture chamber. Nirvana saying that Mindy must be the runt of the litter is probably Raquel Welch commenting on Pam Dauber being less voluptuous, since Mindy isn't particularly petite as such. And for once we get to see Pam Dauber doing mime, as well as Robin Williams. There's a different exterior of the house, and a bus goes by, so I guess they're on a bus route. And the camera zooms in on an upstairs window. There's a faint whirring sound as the box that Mindy is trapped in shrinks and she steps out. Nelson watches her from the doorway with his hands on his hips and a big impressed smile on his face. He claps and says he never knew she had a talent for pantomime. She stutters that Nelson has to help her. Mork has been kidnapped. She starts to explain. He says this is dastardly. Who did it? And she says it was 3 gorgeous, voluptuous women. He says that'd get his goat. She says they're vicious and violent, and they're going to do something terrible to Mork. And Nelson seems to actually be turned on by this, and he says, like what? She says she can't tell him. He asks her to act it out, which is particularly weird considering this is his cousin. Mindy's upset. She doesn't know what to do. Nobody's supposed to know about this. He says this is no stranger here. It's Nelson, her first cousin, and the same flesh. He holds her by the wrist, and he has them sit on the bar stools. He reminds her when they were kids, and he confided to her that he put the goldfish in his mother's clam chowder. She owes him one, as in a confession. She says he's not going to believe her. He says if she wants him to help her, she's going to have to level with him, which is true. She's very upset, and she explains quickly. He says that she can tell Mom about the fish in the chowder. She tries to explain some more.
Nelson, it's true. I was trapped behind a force field right here, or somewhere, but it was here, and then...
Mindy, I understand. It's not easy being a single woman in the now generation. You've got career versus marriage, tradition versus liberation, pregnancy versus being careful.
Nelson!
I thought it was interesting that Nelson being understanding actually is a summary of most single women on 70s sitcoms. In fact, we'll find that it has somewhat of an application to Nirvana in her own way. Mindy says she's telling the truth. He says stress can do funny things, like put the door on the couch. Like he thinks Mindy ripped the door off the hinges and threw it on the couch. He remembers how his mother used to bend spoons. There's quite a bit about Nelson's mother in this episode for some reason. Mindy says that he knows her. She's good old, logical, reliable Mindy. She wouldn't make up something like this. He's going to help her. First, they'll get her to a nice home in the country, far away from the urban hubbub, as if Boulder is just this teeming big city with its 70,000 people. He says it's for her mental and his political health. He'll pay for everything, which I thought was actually generous. I mean, this is Nelson trying to be nice. She asks if he's saying she's crazy. He says crazy is a relative term. As Jimmy probably said of Billy, as in the Carters, why my relative? I have no idea if this is from a movie or if they just quickly made this spaceship exterior, but they do reuse it later. There's a voiceover of the Necroton leader, who's uncredited. He says that they wouldn't have known of the existence of Earth if they hadn't found 2 Humphrey Bogart films when they pillaged the planet Ovitz. Oddly enough, the name Ovitz would return in season 4 for the Harvey Lembeck character who's a classmate of Mork and Mindy's son Mirth. I was trying to figure out if it had any particular meaning. I thought maybe ove related to egg, to contrast to necroton, which is related to death. That's just a guess. This is obviously not the first Bogart reference on this series, and it will have a couple payoffs later in the episode. The leader asks if these movies have been helpful to Nirvana. She says, not much, sir. It's not accurate information. First of all, the Earth isn't even in black and white. The leader says that it's essential they captured the Orkin for his information. She says she's already done so, and he's in the spaceship right now. The leader says this is excellent. They must extract every report he's ever made to his home planet. He says, I hope you can handle this, Captain Nirvana. She says, I appreciate your confidence in me, sir. And he says, I have no confidence in you. And she looks disappointed. And he says the only reason she got this assignment is everyone else is out with the flu. She nervously tells him not to worry, and she won't let him down. As they say on Earth, here's looking at you, kid. And she does it as un-Humphrey Bogart as you can imagine. She clicks to end the call, and then she summons Private Comma to bring in the prisoner. She tells herself she can handle this, but she sounds very insecure. She fluffs her hair in a compact. The door hisses open, as it will every time there's an entrance and exit on the spaceship. Comma leads in Mork, who's wearing a silver blindfold. Comma is wearing a silver full-body cape. Mork is whimpering. Nirvana asks him why, since they haven't even done anything to him yet. He says he's trying to make them feel guilty, which is an old Jewish trick, because Jews are associated with making people feel guilty, usually each other. Comma exits, and the door hisses.
All right, smart guy, turn around, hands in the air.
What are you going to do to me?
Why, I'm going to search you for secret weapons. Nothing here. Turn around. Oh, you seem to have rung my bells. What are you hiding in your pocket? Is that a secret weapon?
No, harmless stuff. I'm just glad to be here.
So obviously the frisking is very suggestive, especially since he rings her bells. Applause at him doing a twist on the Mae West thing of just being glad to be here. The bulge in his pocket is apparently a yo-yo, and he hands it to her. She says they have something like this on Necroton, but without string. It doesn't come back, so it's never been a big seller. She tosses it away. He hands her something very special, chewing gum. They have that on Necroton too. Nonetheless, he tells her that you put it in your mouth and chew. She says, your mouth? Well, I suppose that would work too. And she tosses it away, and so it's implied that it's put in a different orifice. Mork tells her that she'll never get anything out of him. She says, we'll see. She threatens to put him on a rack and stretch him till his tiny little bones crack. He says he'd love it. He'd look like Tommy Tune, referring to the 6 feet 6.5 inch dancer, singer, director, producer, choreographer, etc. She says maybe they'll just hang Mork by his feet until his spine slips out of his nose. He says it just so happens that that's a hobby of his. She probably isn't aware that he sleeps hanging upside down from a circus swing. She says he's going to love it when she wraps a rope around his neck and starts his head up like an outboard motor. He says, ha ha, that old Orkin party trick? He says that Orkins scoff at pain. He laughs defiantly, but she says the jig is up. And she has some interesting turns of phrase, like she's been watching a lot of old Earth movies. Kama and Sutra enter in matching capes. She tells Mork that he'll spill his guts now. She takes off his blindfold, and he says, oh no, a torture chamber, the ultimate Ramada Inn, which I think is partly a reference to the decor, which is fabulously 70s. He says he's got to get out of here. He runs towards the door, but Kama and Sutra put their hands on their hips. He calls them the Supremes, and that gets a big laugh.
We know one thing about you little sissy Orcons, and that is you can't stand any intensive physical pleasure. We'll have you moaning for mercy.
Oh, no. Wow. Romantic music. Soft lighting. Oh, no! Not the hot tub! Not the hot tub!
Yes, get behind the modesty screen and drop them.
You'll never get away with this. If I don't come home for supper, every cop in Boulder will be on your tail.
What's a supper? What's a cop? What's a boulder?
What's the difference?
A lot of this episode feels like, dear hustler, I never thought it could happen to me. There's a lot of male straight fantasy going on here. Of course, they're threatening him with intense physical pleasure, and he'll be moaning for mercy. And there's a hot tub, but at the same time we have a modesty screen, because of course they're not going to strip him naked. He must undress himself. And I like that we see Kama and Sutra reacting to him too. They help Nirvana take off her jacket, so Raquel Welch shows off even more of her cleavage. Sutra suggests using baby oil, but Nirvana says that will leave a slick in the hot tub. Mork admits he's stalling for time. Nirvana tells him to snap it up. She has a planet to destroy, so apparently she's not even going to try conquering. She's just going to destroy Earth when she gets the opportunity. He sets each article of clothing on top of the modesty screen so that we can see his progress. He calls his suspenders moral support. Nice pun. And he puts his pants up there. She snaps her fingers impatiently. And we cut to Kama and Sutra smirking. He sets short, colorful boxers. And then these are followed by smiley face boxers. I almost expected them to say, have a nice day. The audience is just delighted by these. Nirvana asks if he's finished, and he says he thinks so. So she tells him, haul it out here, toots.
Why aren't you naked?
Who I am, this is just a tattoo.
So just like Exodore in A Morkville Horror, we see Mork in kind of a turn-of-the-century bathing costume. It could be his tattoo, but I kind of doubt it. She calls him an Orcon dog. He says that those have 3 legs and fall over every 4th step. This doesn't match earlier episodes where we were told that Orc doesn't have dogs, but maybe he's just making a joke to ease the tension. She suggests he save himself a lot of pleasure and just talk. He says never. My Earth files are top secret. So she tells Kama and Sutra to sick him. You pretty much knew as soon as you saw Kama and Sutra in capes that they were going to have something more revealing on underneath. And of course, the reference to Mr. Bill from Saturday Night Live was very timely then. He says, under the Jupiter Convention, he's entitled to one less meal. So I think that's a play on Geneva Convention. She asks him what he would like, and he says something to go because he's trying to escape. She hands Kama a feather on a stick and tells her to tickle Mork. Sutra holds him in place as Kama tickles him. Nirvana snaps her fingers to make her stop. She says that Mork has a lot more spunk than she gave him credit for. She suggests they get right to the A stuff and throw him in the hot tub, and I don't know what the A stuff is. He yells no and says that these are his new tennies, as in tennis shoes, as they lead him over. He shrieks as Kama and Sutra get into the hot tub with him. Nirvana sits on the deck and says she loves her work. She pours in bubble bath. He wails and says she's cruel, and Kama and Sutra are gripping his arms with all their hands. She has Sutra blow in his ear, and Kama, darling, kiss his little neck. Mork says not to leave a mark, as if he's afraid she's going to give him hickeys. Nirvana tells Kama and Sutra to hold him down. She wants to read to him. He says reading can't hurt him. He's been to Evelyn Woods, so reference to the speed reading course, which of course Mork wouldn't need because he speed reads anyway.
What about smutty limericks?
No, you're despicable! You're despicable!
There once was a lady from Nesham whose bum was as big as her...
No!
Hey, that was a library book.
I really like the futuristic goggles and book, and I'm curious what they're going to rhyme Nesham with. She gets away with saying whose butt was as big, which is pretty suggestive in itself. And I thought it was funny that she's upset because it's a library book. When she leans down to look at it in the tub, she's almost spilling out of her top. Kama, Sutra, and Mork are now standing, and Sutra says the organ doesn't seem to be breaking. Nirvana wants to put him on the trembler, because nobody has ever been able to endure that. She says it's a doomsday machine. Mork is backed up against the wall. Sutra presses a red button, and magic fingers with long nails lightly rub him. So he tries to think about bowling and baseball and Tom Snyder, which I guess are all supposed to be really boring to him, so that he won't become too aroused and spill all his secrets. Sutra says that the organ has formed a mental block and they can't break through. Nirvana says Mork is tougher and smarter than she thought. There's only one way to break through. Leave him alone with her. She snaps her fingers and Kama and Sutra exit. She presses the red button and the arms disappear back into the wall. She stands next to Mork and softly kisses him on the eyes. He says he forgot to close them. She leads him down. She says he's been through a lot. He says war is hell. She calls him poor thing, and she has him sit on a fuzzy chair. She says this is hard for a Necroton to say, but she's really sorry. He says he thought being a Necroton meant never having to say you're sorry, which is a reference to Love Story, the very popular 1970 melodramatic romance, which had been a book before that.
But you don't understand. This is my last chance. If I don't suck out your brain and destroy the earth, well, I'm gonna lose my job.
Oh, you poor kid. I'm sorry I was such a pillar of strength.
And those vultures are just waiting for me to slip up so that they can come in and move into my boots.
Gee, I didn't know mindless destruction was such a competitive field.
You know, sometimes I just want to chuck the whole thing and kidnap a family I could call my own.
I hate to see a barbarian unemployed. Tell you what, I'll tell you everything I know.
Oh, how can I ever thank you?
Well, a simple goodbye would be nice.
Just give me any little old piece of secret information that you have for my report. For instance, these people, the Americans, who is their leader?
Well, they've been trying to figure that one out for years. They pick a new leader, though, every 4 years.
How do they do that?
With a wet T-shirt contest.
What are the duties of this leader?
Well, every spring he throws out the first baseball. After that, he throws out his cabinet. And he tries to make everything perfectly clear except for the atmosphere and the water. And in cases of national emergency, he takes immediate action and books himself a trip overseas.
So we're getting to see her comparatively softer side, and he's sympathetic to her. They're definitely sitting very close. The irony here is that him explaining American politics to her is pretty much like one of his reports to Orson, although we'll find out that the leader thinks it's nonsense. And of course there's a reference to Nixon and the environment. She says that all leaders are alike. An interesting comment because her leader doesn't approve of her, and we know that Orson doesn't really approve of Mork. Nirvana wants to know about the people. He wonders if she means all of them.
All right, I guess I better start with the A's. First of all, there's Aaron Akalala. He was born in Hawaii. He has 2 children, Alan and Arthur. Alan has a tattoo in his forearm of Jack Lord with the inscription, "Why'd you leave the show, Dano?" And his favorite quotation is, his other son now raises herbs on Maui.
So we get a reference not only to Hawaii Five-0, but also to Maui Wowie, a particular strain of marijuana, which would be referred to in the 1980 movie 9 to 5. Does Mork actually know the names of everybody on Earth now? Or is he just bluffing? Nirvana asks how many people are on this planet. Mork says it's 4 billion and they all sleep lying down. He says to understand this planet, she must participate in one of the sacred Earth rituals, Simon says. So he has her close her eyes, spin and turn, and then take one step up. And she's over by the Trembler. He says that the object of the game is to win, and Simon says she loses. He hits the red button and the magic fingers grab her, but they don't massage her, they just hold on to her. She calls him a dirty rat, like she's been watching gangster movies, and says he'll never get away with this. He says Nanu Nanu, and it's been a privilege dealing with her. She tells him to come back. And when he gets to the doorway, he says, as Bogart, "So long, sweetheart. Don't take any wooden dollars." And then he looks unsure about that, and then he decides that that's right. And he exits, and the door closes behind him. She tells the hands, "Let me go! Unhand me!" She calls to Kama and Sutra, and they immediately appear. I'm not sure how, because you would have thought that they would have passed Mork in the hallway. Kama hits the button. Nirvana says she accidentally backed into the machine. Kama and Sutra cross their arms like they're not buying this. Nirvana also says that the Orcon accidentally ran out the door. She says they'll catch him again. Don't worry about it. They uncross their arms and come over to where she's walked. She says she got some really juicy information that she knows will please their leader. She puts a round cartridge into the communication machine and it beeps. And then there's a sound of tape rewinding. The leader calls her a fool and says she blew it again. It's all meaningless drivel. The Orcon has tricked you. She says, "But I tortured him all over the place." The leader wants to talk to Mork. She stutters that Mork ran away, but they'll get him back. He calls her an imbecilia, which I guess is like a Necroton imbecile. He tells her that Orcons are the best hiders in the universe. You'll never catch Mork now that he knows that she's after him. She says she has a plan and she's going to make Mork come to her. He tells her she'd better or she'll be space dust. And then the computer beeps as if he's hanging up. Nirvana says that Mork is very attached to his pet. Sutra remembers him calling it Mindy. Nirvana plans to catch Mindy and bring her here. As Kama and Sutra leave, Nirvana says that they're going to have a lot of fun. She thinks she'll keep Mindy's little foot for her keychain, like a lucky rabbit's foot. And this is pretty clearly where the split comes. Next week on Becoming Human...
Who do you think you are? I mean, you break down my door, you mess up my house, you kidnap my best friend, and now you threaten my cheeks? I mean, you're pushing me too far.
Well, if you think you're pushed too far, my job's on the line. Ha! Sissy stuff. I mean, if you really want to duel, let's go all the way. The Battle of the Rose.
Not the Battle of the Rose.
You know, I've been thinking about all the things that have happened to me since I've met you. For one thing for sure, I never thought I'd end up sitting in a birdcage waiting for my brains to be sucked out by Necrotons.
Well, look on the bright side, you still have your health.
Mork, you know, you didn't have to come back and risk your life to save me, but you did. Thanks.
Yeah, but I kind of botched up. Because if I'd done the right thing, you'd be safe in your own home when they destroyed the Earth.